Welcome to Dory Cote on Shamanism, a weekly podcast that explores one theme in shamanism throughout each month. Get comfortable, have a seat, and let's get started.
Welcome to podcast number 81. Our topic this month is radical hope. It is February 2017.
Dory, please tell us what you mean by radical hope.
Yes, so this is my own version of what I believe is radical hope. It might not be what others would describe, but how I view it and how I experience it is that it's hope that does not just spring forth from observing some event or natural phenomenon that opens our hearts and gives us a tingling sensation of there being hope in the midst of danger or difficult times. Like, for instance, a person might sit and watch an amazing sunset on a glorious beach in the Caribbean and have an experience of like an abundance of heart opening that includes feeling phenomenally hopeful about the earth and about love and about beauty and all of that. That is hope that just springs forth from an event, something that sparks a person's heart and opens them to a new possibility, a range of feeling that engenders a sense of not giving up, of moving forward, of feeling like all is well in the world. That's regular hope. Radical hope is what I call that experience where one has to literally intentionally focus on being in a state of hopefulness while at the same time being submerged or surrounded by negativity, difficult times, suffering, even torture, illness, physical pain, challenging political atmospheres like what we're dealing with in the United States right now. Natural disasters, survivors of natural disasters, feeling hopeful despite the fact that they're in the rubble of an earthquake or a tsunami or some other event such as that. Radical hope takes focus. It takes intention in order to rise above whatever circumstances one finds themselves in. And so that is something that we have to nurture and work on and understand in order for it to be effective and helpful to us at a time when we really, really need hope in order to survive, not just physically, but also emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
So it sounds like regular hope is very close to gratitude. It's almost extending gratitude into the future. Whereas radical hope is holding a vision and living into that vision intentionally and energetically. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I would agree with that. Regular hope, and gratitude, I would say that they could be fairly closely linked, but hope can just be, an amazing experience of, playing with your grandchild and experiencing the beauty of an infant, or it can be, that can engender a sense of hopefulness, like, oh, the future is bright, all is well, look at this beauty, look at this magnificence. And perhaps gratitude, accompanies that, and I'm sure it does at times. Whereas radical hope is strictly, as I see it and understand it and practice it, is the kind of hope where you have to literally pick yourself up by the bootstraps and generate that feeling of hope in the midst of circumstances that look like and feel like the absolute opposite.
And if one practices radical hope on a regular basis, just like working out a muscle, does it get easier with each intention?
From my experience, I would say no. That it is not a practice that that gets easier. It is a practice that you have to continually renew as you find yourself in new and different circumstances. If you're in the midst of the rubble of an earthquake, using that as an example, and you manage to generate radical hope for yourself and you get through it, you walk through it, your heart is broken, you have so many other things going on, but yet you're able to generate this sensation, this belief of in the hope of your future as an individual, and also the future of the planet and all the people around you. So let's say, you manage that, and then 2 weeks later, after that earthquake, some other natural disaster happens, and you are in the midst of it. You would probably have to start from ground zero to generate radical hope for yourself again.
And radical hope is different from prayer because one sources radical hope. Versus prayer is can be asking for intercedence from a higher source.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair distinction?
It is definitely different than prayer. Prayer is an invocation. It's often, prayer can be two things. It can be expressing gratitude and love for beings that are greater than ourselves. And it can also be, an intercession or asking for help. And I don't see radical hope as either of those things.
Why is having radical hope important, particularly right now?
As I see it, being a citizen of the United States and living through some current very, very challenging political decisions and changes that are affecting our democracy and our way of life, I have found radical hope to be an essential aspect of our being able to get through, those of us of good conscience who, truly stand fast with, the many controversial topics that are being addressed and torn asunder at this point. For instance, the most recent, ban against accepting refugees into our country for 120 days. That is a huge blow to the hearts of so many people, and any conscious human who understands equality and justice and all of that. So in order to get through all of these bombardments that are occurring on a daily basis and have been for many months now, even before the inauguration, we as individuals have to conjure up a sense of hope that looks beyond the circumstances of any given day. And it requires practice. It requires a way of being that says, okay, this is happening. I see that this is happening. This is very distressing. It's making me angry. It's making me sad. It's making me fearful. It's making me all of those things. And I now need to not succumb to that, not go into a state of despair and disconnect and just say, oh, what the heck? We're all going to die anyway. Let's just forget it. But rather than doing that, generate inside myself what hope I can for myself and for all people and for the whole planet, actually, for all beings. And it requires discipline. It requires not going to sleep about that, as well as, signing petitions and marching and doing all of those other things. We have to individually and as a collective, I believe, conjure radical hope, knowing that there is an answer, there is possibilities beyond what is in our view right now. Just like the person who is standing in the midst of the rubble of an earthquake, standing there not being able to see anything that looks like hope. It's just all dark and gray and rubble and destruction and death and cold and no food and all of that. We emotionally are in some ways standing in the midst of that kind of rubble. And that's why it's important right now for Americans, for actually all beings, all humans around the globe who are being impacted by the actions, not just of this administration, but of many other leaders around the world, to just say, I'm standing in the midst of this rubble. I'm not seeing anything here that looks like hope, but I need to figure out how I can get a glimmer of hope for myself, for my family, my home, my town, my street, or whatever, that we will survive and we will thrive. And so it's about, how do you conjure that up? So a person can conjure up that sense of hope by doing a variety of things. One of the things I particularly like is visualization. I love working with visualizing beauty and peace and harmony, and going into the stores of my own memory banks to find that place where I was surrounded by love and compassion and gracious, beautiful people who are loving and compassionate and also passionate about life and love. So that's a visualization that I use. I go into my own memory library and pull up one of those events, one of those times in my life, and feel it. I wear it so that it changes my makeup, even if it's just for a few moments. Then I can go back and renew that vision on and off during the course of the day so that I can breathe and survive and come out of the day feeling like there is something positive here that I can hitch my wagon to.
This is very similar to what they have athletes do, which is to see themselves going down a slalom in record time and to feel it in their body before they actually do it. So it, like being a spiritual athlete, this is what you're inviting us to do.
Exactly.
That kind of training.
Exactly. It's a training. It requires attention. It requires intention and practice. And it's interesting that you mentioned the athlete, because one of my examples of how persons have utilized radical hope is the story of a particular athlete who, and I can't remember what her name was, but she was a diver, an Olympic diver, and she was injured before the Olympic trials were happening, so she wasn't able to practice or participate in the early part of the trials. But what she did was every day during her period of time of inactivity, which was many months, she visualized every day and felt in her body, every muscle, every bone, every tendon, every cell of her body going through every one of the jumps that she would make, every dive, and what it felt like as she landed, and exactly how her body would be positioned. And in the end, she got on the team. She was from the United States, I believe. She got on the team, and she won a medal. And she had not practiced physically, but she had practiced mentally. And that's radical hope. See, she did not give up. She was lying in that bed, and she could have just surrendered and said, there's no hope for me. I'm not going to be able to practice. But she found a way through her own radical hope to recognize that she could still compete if she was allowing herself to do those dives in a new and different way that would perhaps and hopefully gain her the capacity to actually do the jumps in the way that she was visualizing them and feeling them.
There's a book called You Are the Placebo.
Okay,
And
I don't know that.
It's about using the power of your mind, and it tells the story of some man who was told he wasn't going to be able to walk, but he refused to accept that.
Mm-hmm.
And he just kept visualizing and bringing in the future where he was walking. And he said that at first it just felt awkward, and he could feel that it wasn't catching on, it wasn't taking, but he kept at it, and he dedicated 20 or 30 minutes a day, twice a day, to doing this. And then after about 6 weeks, something clicked in and it was catching. And so he could do it faster.
Wow.
And I think if one practices radical hope on a regular basis, that there might come a point where you can invoke it faster. Because
I would agree.
Your cells are so tuned up to it that you can find that place faster.
That makes sense to me. I would think that would be true.
Not that it's easier.
Not easier, but possibly faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
What other authors or prisoners of war or survivors, can you give us other examples of people who've practiced radical hope?
Well, one person that came to me as I was working with my own radical hope was Viktor Frankl, author of Search for Meaning. And many of you here in the listening audience probably know of him and know of this book. If you don't, he was a Jewish doctor who was incapacitated by virtue of being captured and put in concentration camps. And he was in 3 different camps during the course of his incarceration, and one of them being Auschwitz. And despite the fact that he was surrounded on a daily basis by unimaginable grief, pain, suffering, physical discomfort, filth, terror, death, he found within himself the radical hope that it took to find love and feel love and compassion for himself and for all of humanity, including his oppressors. And through that, he was able to survive and find himself on the other side of this experience, being able to pen this amazing piece of work around hope, around love, around the capacity to overcome the most gross adversity anybody could possibly imagine. He didn't find that because he could see hope. There was no hope anywhere to be seen. There was no hope anywhere to be felt. There was only suffering and torture and pain. He conjured up radical hope. That's what I'm talking about. And he's just a perfect example of what I'm talking about. What we're going through as Americans today in our in the challenges of our democracy and the unfolding of new ways of being and new policies and new things, that doesn't hold a candle to what Viktor Frankl went through. And yet, despite that, we must find within ourselves that place of radical hope as individuals and as a people, so that we can rise above what is happening and not just survive, but overcome the adversity in our minds and in our hearts, so that together we are able to literally survive and thrive.
I want to make the distinction, because I think you're pointing to it here, that Frankl didn't just put pink nail polish over something that was brown.
Exactly. He did not.
It wasn't butterflies and unicorn kind of
Not at all.
It was taking the brown and turning it into compost and growing something from it that gave a deep, deep strength. So we're not talking about a cheap or tinny kind of hope here.
No. Thank you for clarifying that. That is so absolutely true. He did not go to the rainbows and unicorns place in his mind of like, la, 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 I'm not seeing any of this. None of this is happening.
Right.
That's denial. Whereas radical hope is seeing the truth, being in the midst of the truth, knowing that you're in the rubble, that you're in a concentration camp, that you're surrounded by pain and suffering and death
Mm-hmm.
and terror and starvation and all of that, and being able to conjure up the hope that this, what is happening around you, is not who you are as a human, and is not really truly who anybody around you is.
Mm-hmm. And that life is more than this and will be and can be and is going to be.
Exactly. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. So Nelson Mandela must have had some version of this to have gone through that incarceration and come out the other side.
Well, he's another person that I would name for sure. He was incarcerated for a very, very long time. He had an amazingly strong message, and he never gave up hope.
Mm-hmm.
Here he was incarcerated. All his civil liberties were stripped from him, his capacity to communicate with his people. And yet, when he came out of being incarcerated, he still had that shininess in his eyes. They didn't kill him. They didn't kill his spirit. He was able to maintain that sense of radical hope so that when he came out, he was still Nelson Mandela with the same message, with the same hope, with the same power, and the same stars in his eyes, knowing that there is love, there is compassion, there is hope, regardless of the external circumstances.
So radical hope starts with the individual. How do you envision it working in a community, or the community helping the individual to maintain it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jill. What I see is that, as I practice radical hope, what I call radical hope, I am inviting others, through this podcast and through things that I post on Facebook and with the students that I teach and the clients that I work with, to help them find their way to doing this as well. And then through that, it's like lighting one candle at a time. And even though we might not be connected through other means, we are connected because we're all holding up a candle. And so, the community can be so large that we don't actually even know who each other are. That doesn't matter. What matters is that there's a lot of us out there practicing radical hope. So I'm hoping radically that this podcast will be heard by hundreds and hundreds of people who will begin to practice radical hope in their own lives, and then teach another one or two people the same. And through that, we light a lot of candles and we don't lay down. We don't stop. We keep going. We live on. We hold on to hope and trust and know that love and compassion still exists despite the fact that we cannot see it.
Do you have anything else on this topic or words of wisdom that might help someone with this practice?
What I would like to say in the end is that, I invite people to write to me by email. My email address is dory@dorycote.com. If you have any questions, if you have any insights, if you need some help in maintaining that sense of radical hope for yourself, I invite you to do that. And otherwise, I suggest people practice in the moment. It takes attention. When you find yourself slipping down that slippery slope because you just read something or you heard something or you were in the midst of some real ugliness that happened in the outside world, observing somebody being discriminated against or watching, something abusive on TV or whatever. Begin from step one, allowing yourself to go in your mind's eye to a time when you felt very, very hopeful. Sink into that and hold on to it. And then just keep practicing every time something occurs in your life that takes you down that slope of feeling hopeless. Go back to that practice. Keep doing it so that it becomes so automatic. It's like brushing your teeth before you go to work in the morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Dory Cote on shamanism. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, reactions, and questions. Come on over to dorycote.com and join the conversation. And tune in next week for more on this subject, or next month for a new subject. You can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or sign up on dorycote.com to receive notices when the podcasts are posted. That's Dory, D-O-R-Y, and Cote, C-O-T-E.com. Drumming and rattling by Dory Cote and Terry Morgan. Technical assistance and audio production by JillHackett.com. And this is Susan Savelle, wishing you many blessings in your life. We hope to have you join us next time.